Good morning. It's November 15th, 2021, and I'm Deanna from The Rational Educator. Happy American Education Week. This is the week before Thanksgiving, and every week since 1921, this has been designated as American Education Week to celebrate public education. So let's see what there is to celebrate today. And the hot button issue of the day is critical race theory. So I wanted to dive in a little bit to inform you about critical race theory, show you some current news articles, and then to dive in a little bit about how embedded this is into education. And so just to help arm parents, to give them a voice, and to help even concerned citizens to make sure that kids are not being indoctrinated in schools. So, critical race theory. This is an article that came out this morning from Arizona, and these parents pulled their daughters from school. And as we can see here, this was in the Peoria Unified School District, which is in the Phoenix metropolitan area. And their 13-year-old daughter brought home a photo of the whiteboard, and while they were learning about the civil rights movement and heroes such as Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, they also kind of put in Black Lives Matter movement and lumped all of that together. And so the parents, what they did, they pushed back. They tried to get copies of the curriculum from the teacher. They had meetings with the parents, or the parents had meetings with the teacher and the principal, and all they got was some pushback. And so basically, in March of 2021, after there was this child labor assignment that was assigned, they pulled their kid from school. And what's interesting is that we're seeing more and more of this. In fact, I read a story over the weekend about that even Black Americans are pulling their kids out of public schools at a higher rate than even some other groups. If you want to break things down by race, which I don't like doing, but that's really the focus. That's really what's happening in America today. Is everything is about race first and foremost. There's nothing about the individual. There's nothing about an individual's character. It's so gross to see. And as a historian, I just look at what's happening today, and we're just going backwards in terms of making a more sort of a society that doesn't really, race isn't the primal thing about being human, and your moral character, your individuality, your accomplishments, your merits, all of those things are under attack. The only thing that matters is race, and this is being pumped into the schools. So this is just one example, parents taking their kids out, and we're going to be seeing more and more of this. And honestly, I'm a homeschool advocate. I was not a homeschool advocate for a long time, but I left my tenured post as a professor, and I became a homeschool advocate because I was in the system and I saw what was happening. I saw what was happening on the college level. I saw the ideas students were getting from K through 12, and I had to walk away. I kind of basically said I had to save my own soul. And we're going to be seeing more teachers walk away, and what's going to be left are the teachers that are so embedded in this ideology, which comes out of the teachers college. I mean, I'm going to show you some examples of how embedded this is in education. There's no escaping it, and really the only way is to find a way to pull your kids, get connected with other parents, find a homeschool co-op, but figure out a way to take back the education of your children. But let's continue our little journey down critical race theory. So I just did a search a few minutes ago of critical race theory. And so it's just a Google search, critical race theory, and everything is about education. For parents in Win Ohio School Board campaigning against critical race theory. Critical race theory defender tells parents he's got 1,000 soldiers locked and loaded at a school board meeting in Fort Worth, Texas. The governor of North Dakota signing a ban. And so as you can see, as you just scroll through Google, it's all about education and critical race theory. I mean, this is a ideological war that is happening in America today. And so I thought, what a great topic for National Education Week, because it is really frightening to see how deep this goes. So I pulled up, ERIC is a research database, and it's something I used a lot when I was in my doctoral program in education. And it's where you go and you search for articles, and this is where you do your research. And I checked the peer reviewed, because you do want peer reviewed articles. The problem is, and there's a great group of professors, James Lindsay is one of them, who submitted ridiculous peer-reviewed articles, and they were farce. It was a farce, but they used buzzwords, critical race theory. They used these Marxist ideas, and they would get published in these top journals. So this is just a research database. It's kind of like doing a Google search, but you're looking for papers in academic journals. And so critical race theory and counselor education pedagogy, using critical race theory to explore the experiences of college students from rural areas, why the critical race theory concept of white supremacy should not be dismissed by neo-Marxists. And we have a video that we did about Marxism, and we talk about the neo-Marxists and sort of that, where that comes from. Critical race theory and Islamophobia, a space for survivance, located Kanaka Mali through the resonance and dissonance of critical race theory, countering deficits. So all of these, this is the research where people in teachers' colleges and educators and even college professors, academics, they're going to be going, and this is really, and I searched for critical race theory, so that's what's coming up, but there is such a prevalence of critical race theory in the literature now. It is so deeply embedded, and this goes back, it's not, just a couple of years. I left education in 2017, and it was really bad then, and it had been for quite some time. And so this is just, and these articles are a little more current, but they go back to the earlier 2000s. So I want to look at the source, Critical Race Theory. This is the book by Richard Delgado and Jean Stefancic, and this is the book on critical race theory. So this is the sort of instruction manual on critical race theory. And when I was getting my doctorate in education, I used critical theory as a way to look at intellectual diversity in education. So I basically turned this Marxist ideology and used it against them to show that there's really not a lot of intellectual diversity in education. And we know that, and this is all coming forward. So I want to go over to page 32, because there's an important thing here that I want to point out on this National Education Week. So in defining critical race theory, they say right here that it is a revisionist history. And so revisionist history examines America's historical record, replacing comforting majoritarian interpretations of events with ones that square more accurately with minorities' experiences. It also offers evidence, sometimes suppressed in that very record, to support those new interpretations. Revisionism is often materialist in thrust, holding that to understand the zigs and zags of Black, Latino, and Asian unfortunes, one must look to things like profit, labor supply, international relations, and the interest of elite whites. So those people that are saying that critical race theory is not Marxist are lying to you. These words, when you start seeing the words materialist, focusing on labor, looking at elites, looking at words like profits, they don't even have to use words like capitalism. They sneak these terms in. And one of my main purposes of doing these shorter videos, as well as our weekly podcasts, is to arm people who want to fight for America and for kids not being indoctrinated in their school. And this is revisionist history, is just like it sounds. So we have history. I'm a historian. There are primary documents, and there are ways of researching and triangulating information. I also did archaeology, and historians will often look to the archaeological record to try to triangulate and corroborate what is in these documents. Now, when you have letters and diaries and things like that, we call those micro histories. And so you can tell the story of one individual, Or you can tell the story of a small group of individuals. For instance, the plight of the Puritans in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Looking only at their story and their experience, that's what we call a microhistory. But the revisionists take these ideas and they see basically anybody who's white or in power, and this is a Marxist lens, they are the oppressors, and they want to revise history to show that all people who are sort of in power or are the oppressors are evil, and this is what's happening. And it doesn't take into the nuances of a very complex system of history. Now, history is the written record. So in order for it to be history, there has to be writing. So going back to Egypt, Mesopotamia, early Chinese dynasties, those, once they have writing, then we call it history. If they don't have a writing, then we call it prehistory. And so even in history, we can use the archaeological record. We can work to really try to understand the past and do it not through this lens of everyone's an oppressor or everyone's a victim, but just to try to openly understand the past. Now, as historians, I tend to be a cultural historian, so I'm interested in culture. I'm really interested in culture clashes, in conflicts. I studied the fall of Rome. I'm a late antique historian, so I looked at early Christianity. I was an early Christian historian and looking how the change of religion really impacted the Roman Empire and what came after that, particularly in Egypt with the Coptic Christians. And so it's very interesting to see that this revisionist history is right there in critical race theory, because they want to revise history to basically convince people of their own sort of propaganda is really what it is. So another thing I want to point out on this National Teachers Week is this pledge to teach. And this is a pledge to teach the truth. This is a website that is through the Zinn Education Project. If you don't know Zinn, Howard Zinn was a professor and an author, and he wrote the People's History of the United States. So there's this pledge to teach the truth. And this pledge is lawmakers in at least 27 states are attempting to pass legislation that would require teachers to lie to students about the role of racism, sexism, heterosexism, and oppression throughout U.S. history. And so basically, this is a pledge that teachers can sign, and there have been over 5,000 teachers who have signed it, that they will continue to teach critical race theory and this idea of this Zinn proposed idea of history. Now, let's look at Zinn's teaching materials. Making Good the Promises, Reclaiming the Reconstruction and Its Legacies, Mighty Justice, The Untold Story of Civil Rights Trailblazer, Blackbirds in the Sky. So this may look, like, oh, okay, I can see how this might be interesting. The Struggle Over Slavery in Public Spaces, Fugitive Pedagogy. Now we're getting into some things, the Kaepernick effect, Taking a Knee, Revolution in Our Time. And so what they're doing is that they are arming teachers to teach students to be activism. So it's no longer important to just teach reading, writing, arithmetic, these objective skills that students can then use and use their own brain and their individual ability to assess information and find truth and to understand things. And that is a very nuanced process. So the younger the kids are, the more just the sort of learning how to read, write, and do mathematical concepts and teaching kids these skills. And then as they get older, because of the way human minds evolve over time, then the mind is able to take these sort of isolated facts and then integrate them into more abstractions. And then by the time they're in high school, they can take all this information that they've learned. But no, education now is all about activism and teaching activism. And I'm going to do another video about how that came to be. And so what we see on the Zinn project are basically teacher unions and social justice, how to change everything. And it kind of starts off looking a little good, but then it's all about teaching kids to be activism, and everything is Marxist. It is oppressor and victim, and that is everything. So, Howard Zinn, this is from the biography on howardzinn.org, and I want to share this with you. So, A People's History of the United States, 1492 to present, was first published in 1980, and it is a history book that is widespread. It is taught in high schools and it is taught in colleges across America. If you see your student come home with this history book, challenge it. It is awful. And so this is in Howard Zinn's own words from 1999. And I'm going to read this verbatim. It's this paragraph right here. I decided to write what people had been looking for, or at least people would approach me and say, you've been teaching American history and so on. Can you recommend a good one? A good one-volume history of the United States from a radical point of view. No. Well, not really. I don't want to go into bibliographical detail about what there is and what there isn't, but not exactly, But these were the demands that came out of the movements of the 60s. Because of the movements of the 60s, people were looking for something different. People were remembering the kind of history that they had learned in high school and college, and were thinking, this doesn't fit what I see in the world today. And so they were looking for something, and so I decided to write something to fill that need. So, A People's History of the United States is a book that he wrote to fulfill a need because people couldn't accept history for its objective truth. There is objectivity in history. Historians learn to corroborate their research. They learn to look at documentation. A good historian does their due diligence. Howard Zinn is not a good historian because he is just writing a book to meet a need, to sell books. And it is absolutely Marxist. It is all about there are oppressors and victims, and that is Marxism. Whether they call it critical race theory, critical theory, revisionist history, it's all the same thing. And this is what is being taught in schools. So, on this American Education Week, I wanted to give parents, concerned citizens, some armor in this fight to save children and to save their minds, and to not let every child in America grow up to know that they are either the problem, they are the oppressor, or they are a victim. So there is no way to win. There is no way to succeed. The system is against you no matter who you are, and that is abuse. So thanks for watching. You can check out our other podcasts on our YouTube channel. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook, Parler, at The Rational Educator. We're on Twitter, and we also have a website, rationaleducator.com. You can sign up for our mailing list, and you'll get not a lot of emails, but you'll get some really critical information about once a week of what's going on in education in America, and a little fodder for you to use to help fight. Have a great one.